Hey guys, my name is Siobhan Fallon. Welcome back. I'm trying something new today. This is the first time I've collaborated with another writer, with the retired professional anthropologist, now amateur historian and author, Lilah Morton Pengra, who wrote the incredible biography, Isaiah Dorman, Interpreting the Evidence. I recommend it to all of you. I think you should order it immediately, or at least after this video. And if you're not familiar with Isaiah Dorman's life, he was the only Black man with the 7th Cavalry who died at the Battle of the Little Bighorn on June 25th, 1876. All right, guys, let's learn more. Thank you so much for joining me. As mentioned, Isaiah Dorman was the only Black man killed with the 7th Cavalry on June 25th, 1876. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer hired Fred Gerard to interpret for his Arikara scouts on this expedition. Custer then hired Isaiah Dorman to interpret for the Dakota scouts. Fred Gerard and Isaiah Dorman had been making $50 a month, but they were to be paid $75 a month as interpreters on this expedition. Fred Gerard survived and returned home. Isaiah Dorman did not. Isaiah Dorman had been assigned to Major Reno's column on June 25, 1876. On that day, he accompanied the scouts into the valley. During Major Reno's retreat, Isaiah tried to follow the fleeing soldiers. He fell with his horse between the timber and the river, not far from the scout Charlie Reynolds. A soldier later found Lonesome Charlie Reynolds and Isaiah lying together as if they would not leave each other. Fast forward about 125 years, Lilah Morton Pengra was helping put together a museum exhibition about African Americans in Black Hills history when she happened upon a short paragraph about Isaiah Dorman. That moment led to more than 15 years of research and a 335-page book. Her writing journey has been a long one and included its own tragedy when the first printing of Lilah's book was almost entirely destroyed in a fire. But Phoenix-like, she has risen from the ashes and just come out with a second printing. I finished this book a few months ago and was so impressed with Lilah's dedication, I reached out to her. She graciously let me interview her, and we worked on the slideshow together. Not only does Lilah reveal Isaiah Dorman's rather complicated and full life, she clears up many of the stereotypes and assumptions, writing, I found much of the currently accepted story of Dorman's life to be an illusion that has gained false credibility because one author cited a previous one who drew on someone before him. Which brings us to the theme of this video. Will the real Isaiah please stand up? If you were to Google images of Isaiah Dorman, you'd find quite a few, but are they authentic? One way to determine their validity is to find out where and when the photo was taken, and then find out if Isaiah was actually there at that time. In a nutshell, Isaiah was born free in Water Street, Pennsylvania. He helped build Fort Ridgely in Minnesota Territory, and he married his Dakota wife there. He was hired as a servant by Captain Alfred Sully and stayed with him at Fort Kearny in Nebraska Territory, then on to the Civil War in Virginia, and finally returned with Sully to Dakota Territory, where he fought at Whitestone Hill and Killdeer Mountain. Isaiah chopped wood with Durfee and Peck, built a home further up the Missouri River, carried mail for the Army to Fort Wadsworth, served as a guide for the 1871 Northern Pacific Railroad Survey, and eventually was hired on as an interpreter at Fort Rice from 1871 to 1876. All of this, of course, culminating in the fateful summer of 1876. There are quite a few verified physical descriptions of Isaiah. The Cheyenne Wooden Leg said he was a big man, which could mean that Isaiah was heavy-set, muscular, and tall. However, Wooden Leg was interviewed in Indian Sign Language. The sign for big has two meanings, physically big or socially big. Lilah says wooden leg meant Isaiah was important because Dakota had to trust interpreters to translate their concerns accurately and to explain to them what the fort and expedition commanders were telling them, especially when treaties were being signed and battles fought. A quote from Sitting Bull gives us an example of big man used with this social meaning. Before I left my mother's insides, the God Almighty must have told me to think that I would be the judge of all the Indians, a big man to decide for them. The Dakota often called Isaiah by the nickname of Black Hawk. A staff writer for the New York Herald wrote that Black Hawk was ignorant, dissolute, and immoral. I am grieved to say he is a full-blooded Negro. Could this be Isaiah? William Boyes, in his book, Custer's Black Man, wrote, "There are no known photographs of Isaiah Dorman, and there are only 2 descriptions of his physical appearance. They were both made by hostile Indians, and they describe Dorman as a huge man and very black." Boyes described everything known about Isaiah at that time. However, there have been newly located primary documents. Lilah discovered that another black man on the upper Missouri River, Peter Frank, was also named Black Hawk. Peter Frank was a freed slave of an early trader and also employed as an interpreter, most notably at Fort Berthold and later at Fort Yates. Peter Frank was big and black, and to add to the confusion, he and Isaiah were married to sisters. In Lakota kinship, that made them brothers-in-law. Peter Frank drank and was deeply involved in the whiskey trade. Isaiah Dorman was sober and against the whiskey trade. Peter Frank was a dark-skinned black man and much later reputed as the strongest man on the reservation. Dorman was a light-skinned black man. Theodore Golden wrote, Dorman's father was said to be a Jamaican Negro and his mother a squaw. Thunder Bear said Isaiah was a black man half-breed. And Robert Maskell Patterson, in his memoirs of the 1871 Northern Pacific Railroad Survey, said Isaiah was half Indian and half Negro. Army servant vouchers claiming reimbursement from employing Isaiah at Fort Ridgely, Minnesota Territory, and Fort Kearny, Nebraska Territory, recorded similar details for him. Black hair, black eyes and complexion, and several noted light black or black light, between 5'10" and 6 feet tall, and having woolly or curly hair. In 1861, when Isaiah was a servant for Alfred Sully, Sully wrote his sister, "The mail carrier brought the bundle. The leggings are of no use here in mud up to the horse's knees. Besides, I can't draw them over my heavy riding boots. I have given them to Isaiah. He has cut the feet off and says he will wear them like Indian leggings. He'll cut a figure, for his legs are very crooked." Isaiah's crooked legs possibly came from rickets caused by a vitamin D deficiency because he didn't get enough sunlight in childhood. Maybe because his childhood home in the narrow valley of Water Street, Pennsylvania, was shaded by many trees, with smoggy skies due to coal furnaces at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Now, this photo is often said to be Isaiah. However, J.C.H. Gabriel photographed this member of the 25th Infantry of Buffalo Soldiers who were with the 7th Cavalry at Fort Meade near Sturgis, Dakota Territory, at some point between 1880 and 1886, which means the photo was taken after Isaiah Dorman's death. Isaiah's crooked legs may have made it difficult for him to ride a horse. There are at least 3 records of him falling off his horse, and yet he was able to do 2 420-mile round trips in the winter between Fort Rice and Wadsworth's in 1866 and 1867, carrying military mail through deep snow. He chose to walk perhaps because his crooked legs led to poor horsemanship. I sure hope he had a buffalo coat like this fellow. Here is another, albeit awesome, photo that often claims to show Isaiah in the center of this group of men. The saloon is usually identified as being located in Fort Abraham Lincoln or Mandan. But there's some problems. The black man here doesn't quite fit the description Lilah has uncovered so far, of a light-skinned, mixed-race man with curly hair and crooked legs. Also, Isaiah was an interpreter at Fort Rice, not Fort Lincoln, and Mandan was founded in 1879, which of course was after Dorman's death. But perhaps the best detective work here is that done by Colonel Rodney Thomas, an expert in photo identification and Indian ledger art interpretation, who pointed out, this was taken after 1886, the year Schlitz Brewing Company adopted its trademark, the belted globe. Material culture discounts this being a photograph of Isaiah Dorman. Now we come to this very famous photo taken by William H. Illingworth on Custer's 1874 expedition to the Black Hills. John Ravage suggested in his first edition of the book, Black Pioneers, that the man standing in the background at the corner of the tent might be Isaiah Dorman. That tentative suggestion quickly spread as fact. The problem is that records for Fort Rice showed Dorman did not go on the 1874 expedition. There were no Dakota scouts with the 1874 expedition that might have needed his translation services. And a high-res scan and enlargement of the photo by Ernest Graft and Paul Horsted for their book, Crossing the Plains with Custer, showed a white man shaded by his hat. Sadly, sites like Find a Grave and Black Past now show the cropped image of the white man in shadow, and they label it as a picture of Isaiah Dorman. Graft and Horsted said, we never really entertained the notion that Dorman was on the expedition, as it hadn't come up in our research, nor other publications, and he's not listed on the roster, of course. Even Lilah occasionally has a misstep. In her article in the Little Bighorn magazine, Greasy Grass, in 2014, she suggested the man on the far right of this photo at Fort Berthold was Isaiah Dorman because his legs and chest appeared to reflect the effects of rickets. His hair peeking out from under his hat looked curly, and he matched the 6-foot height of others in the photo. Also, Sully, his troops, and his servant, Isaiah, camped near Fort Berthold in 1865 when this photo was taken. But circumstantial evidence isn't always enough. In 2015, Mike Cowdery disagreed with Lilah's identification and suggested the man was Pierre Garreau, Fort Berthold's interpreter. In 2019, Ephraim Dixon, in a North Dakota history article, identified the photographer as Byron Guernsey, not Alfred Sully, as Lilah mistakenly assumed. Here is a picture of Garreau taken in 1881. And here is an excerpt of a letter Larnard wrote after he visited Fort Berthold in the 1860s, recounting a story that Garreau, post-trader and interpreter, had escaped from a party of warriors. Garreau whipped out a shotgun that he had cut down to 6.5 inches of length and carried it suspended around his neck by a string, concealed by his hunting shirt and his neckerchief, which might explain the bulge here in his shirt instead of rickets. Sketches can also create problems. Author Robert Edge described Isaiah as big and very black, wearing a straw hat and smoking a corn cob pipe. We've already seen the myth of, quote, big and very black and where it comes from. However, Lilah in all her research never found a written mention of a straw hat and a corn cob pipe, except in fictional accounts. Edge was also the source of the idea that Isaiah was a runaway slave from Louisiana. But that's a story for another day. Now here is a really cool find. You'll remember that Isaiah was employed as a servant for General Alfred Sully for years. Alfred was the son of a famous painter, Thomas Sully, and Alfred was a talented amateur painter himself. His grandson, Langdon Sully, wrote No Tears for the General, a biography about Alfred, and he stated that Alfred only cared for, quote, his horse and his servant. Well, here is Alfred Sully's self-portrait that he painted near the end of his life, showing him with a horse and a man lounging in the background. Maybe this is his servant, Isaiah. Closer inspection of the shadowy figure shows he might be wearing a straw hat. Maybe diaries and reports yet to be found will solve this mystery about the straw hat and the corncob pipe. Research is an unfinished quest, and if anyone gets to the bottom of it, I bet it's going to be Lilah. Ooh, I love this one, guys. This slide was a lot of fun to make. So here's another sketch that shows up often on websites claiming to tell Isaiah Dorman's story. Sam Patrick drew it to illustrate an article by George Reasons. The article and sketch appeared in newspapers across the United States in the 1970s when they co-authored a syndicated column. Lilah told me how she stared and stared at this sketch until it was imprinted on her brain. Then, on a trip to Hardin for the Custer Battlefield Historical and Museum Association Conference, she spent some time at the Bighorn County Library, browsing through their collection of Custerania. While thumbing through Lawrence Frost's The Custer Album, she immediately recognized the source of this particular sketch. When you put these images side by side, the similarities are striking. But I played with the transparency a little bit, the way I've done in some of my other videos. And when you superimpose the photo of George Custer over the image of Isaiah Dorman, well, you can see how well they match up. And here, I'm going to do it in red so you can see it again. Oh my gosh, it's crazy, right? So I'd say that not only was the artist inspired by this photo of Custer, but he may have actually traced it. All right, here's the Dorman sketch again. Oh my goodness, it's pretty remarkable, huh, guys? Good find, Lilah. So we may not have succeeded in finding a photograph or even an authentic sketch of Isaiah Dorman, but in challenging some of the myths and stereotypes about his image, we are better able to visualize him. Here is one of my favorite passages from Lilah's book, which I think is evocative of Isaiah and his life and helps me, at least, picture him best. Raising horses became profitable that year because the 7th Cavalry came west to garrison at Fort Rice and to build Fort Abraham Lincoln further up the Missouri. Dorman's son, Baptiste, raised American horses to sell to the Army and continued to sell cordwood for a few years. The Dorman home was located on a high bluff overlooking the Missouri, which flooded in the spring, but the current was slowed by a bend and several islands above Willow Creek. Thus very rich silt settled in the bottom land and fertilized a large vegetable garden and several fields of corn. On the bluff, Isaiah and his sons plowed and planted patches of oats and barley for their horses and cut hay. They also fished, hunted, and trapped for food and pelts. During his first 10 years in Dakota Territory, Dorman had matured from a young man living with his wife and their small children and working first as a servant, then as a mail carrier, woodhawk, and guide. By 1873, he owned a horse ranch with his wife and their adult son. So while I want us to remember Dorman in the fullness of his life, my channel is primarily about the Battle of the Little Bighorn, so we also need to mention his tragic death on June 25, 1876. These details also sum up the man as much as any photo, and I'm going to read an excerpt from Lilah's book. At age 44, Dorman was no longer young. In spite of crooked legs, he had successfully managed to earn his living and provide for his family on the western frontier, where physical stamina was critical. He had pitched tents, cooked meals, and packed bags for others. He had chopped wood, carried mail, and guided soldiers. Ultimately, however, his skill and knowledge as an interpreter of Lakota language and culture brought him to this day. As mentioned earlier, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer ordered Major Marcus Reno and his column into the valley. His adjutant, Lieutenant William Weiner Cook, delivered this order. The Indians are about 2.5 miles ahead. They are on the jump. Go forward as fast as you think proper and charge them wherever you find them, and Custer will support you. Reno did so with companies A, M, and G and the Indian Scouts. The companies stopped and formed a skirmish line in the valley. Civilian employees such as Bloody Knife, Re-Scouts, Charlie Reynolds, and Isaiah Dorman were not expected to serve on that firing line. As the Indian warriors advanced from the villages, Reno's skirmish line and the others moved into a timber. Not long after, Reno, afraid that the timber had been infiltrated by the warriors, ordered a retreat. A disorganized and chaotic withdrawal followed. Isaiah Dorman left the timber, and within moments his horse was shot. Private Roman Rutten described what happened next. Isaiah's horse had been shot down, and Isaiah was making a stand, down on one knee, coolly firing his sporting rifle at the Indians. I passed him, and he looked at me and cried out, "Goodbye, Rutten." Rutten later wrote in a letter, "Bloody Knife, Isaiah, and Charlie Reynolds were killed right out of the woods, 50 feet apart." Here's another view of the retreat, guys. You can see 2 X's for Reynolds. The one that says Reynolds Pipe is the earlier marker left by the Little Bighorn researcher Walter Camp. You can also see that's a bit closer to Dorman. Meanwhile, George Herendeen, a scout who was left behind in that timber, watched what unfolded. He said, "Isaiah was killed soon after getting out of the timber, not far from Charlie Reynolds. Charlie got about 150 yards out when he was shot, and Isaiah fell near him. And while I was in the timber, I saw Indians shooting at Isaiah and squaws pounding him with stone hammers. His legs below the knee were shot full of bullets, only an inch or 2 apart." It wasn't until June 25th, 1983, that a white marker was finally unveiled. Isaiah Dorman, interpreter, fell near here June 25th, 1876, and on the back it reads, "Donated by the Adolph Coors Company, Barney Ford Memorial Association." And the Barney Ford Memorial Association is an African American advocacy group in Colorado, guys. Isaiah's marker is in the middle of a pasture, so it's enclosed by a pipe fence to protect it from cattle. Isaiah Dorman is also listed on the monument on Last Stand Hill, unfortunately only by his first name. All right, guys, that's all for now. Please come back soon, watch another video in the meantime, and like, subscribe, leave me a comment, tell me what you want me to work on next. And thank you, as always, for watching. You're the best. Thank you, Lilah Pengra. Now you guys can go order her book on eBay. Bye, guys. Thanks a lot.
When I was young